Hello, my name's Peter Bubestinger from Vienna, and except for what we're going to speak about, open source and business models, I get to work with a lot of institutions across the globe. Now, since I travel a lot, I figured there are not so many things anymore that you don't get everywhere around the globe. So globalization is a good thing, but I was looking for something to bring whenever I travel as a treat that you don't get as easily anywhere else. So this is a special chocolate from Austria, and you might get it somewhere, but probably not. And I will hand them out. So each, please just pick one. And I'll start in the first row, and the other first row. Because the lesson learned for next time, as Antonella said yesterday, well, if you sit in the front rows, it's better for everyone, and you get chocolate. So, I should not sit on this. So this is going to be about open source business models, and we have modified, sorry, I'm still grabbing my notes, the participants here on stage. At the beginning, it was just people who provide, as a company, paid services for open source. That's why it's about open source business models. But now, may I introduce you? It's Jérôme Martinez from Media Area, the company who implemented MediaConch in the first place. And they're really well known for their program Media Info. The second one is Carl Wilson from the Open Preservation Foundation. It's not actually a company, and you'll explain in details what you do. Then we have Klaas from the Riksarkivet in Sweden, already known from yesterday. He's on the user side, as well as Julia Kim from the Library of Congress, as we've seen her yesterday. She's also from the user side. So what we're going to do, together with you, is now explore what the hell is this open software stuff, and why are we talking about business? Therefore, you think you want to add anything about you personally, or should we just dive right into it? Okay. First of all, we'll start with you. The question is, we've had in these 2 days, we've heard the term open source a lot. Like the whole thing is like open source here, open source there. Who of you uses open source? Please raise your hands. Okay, that's quite good. Let's turn it around. Who does not? Like, seriously, like no open source, none whatsoever. That's a bit. Okay, I would say that this means that either anyone's hiding or everyone actually is using open source at one point or another. Brings me to my second question. Who of you knows what open source is? Who of you does not? Okay, then I can pick a random person from the audience explaining to me what open source is or what defines it. Who wants to explain to me what open source is and the difference to proprietary closed software? Anyone? Lights. Okay. Well, I have to ask someone anyway. No, seriously. Any one of you, just say, what is open source? If you all know it, okay, sorry, I don't know. Okay.
So open source is when the code, the source of the software is published. So that you can actually open it, read it, change it, recompile it.
Who agrees, who disagrees? Who would disagree? Antonella?
How to republish, how to change it.
Yeah, we're getting there. So, okay, one thing to sum it up. Yes, partially yes, and then everything together, it's Open source is basically defined by 4 freedoms. The 4 freedoms to use, study, share, and improve software. It does not define if you have to publish the source code anywhere online or accessible in any form other than if I give you the executable binary, the .exe or binary for whatever, I have to give the source code to you with the binary. I don't have to publish it. I don't have to go on GitHub. I don't have to give anyone access to modifying the source code online. I don't even have to receive patches from anyone. But I have to give the people that I give the closed, kind of like scrambled executable, the source code and the right to use, study, share, and improve it. So a common thing that I encounter is that open source actually is very often perceived as freeware. That people go like, oh yeah, open source is not the stuff with the source code because they don't care. What do people do with source code? It's, hey, we don't have to pay anything. So open source, I would say, is often perceived as freeware. There's the commercial software, as we've often heard it these days, in like the opposite of open source. How does this perception as freeware affect your work, or especially from the supplier side and also from the user side? Please pick the microphone.
We have this issue that open source is considered as freeware sometimes, or very often, and this is actually not the case. You have some proprietary software which is freeware, and you have some open source software which is not freeware. There is a big difference between open source and not open source, and freeware, not freeware. And a lot of people is mixing the both. And we need to spend a lot of time explaining that, no, this is open source, but this is not freeware. We need to pay. It is only different. You don't pay usually for the code already developed, but sometimes you do, because, for example, we sell Media Info on the Mac App Store with a €1 fee. It is open source, but we sell Media Info. And some people don't understand that it is possible to sell open source, but we need to be clear and we need to explain every day that open source does not mean freeware. So at some point we need to be paid for something. We have a different business model, and it hurts a bit us that a lot of people is considering that open source, it is free for everything. And people say, I have a bug report, okay, please fix it. I use your software, so I am a user, you need to fix it. Okay, but you didn't pay, so at some point, please pay.
Okay, Carl?
Yeah, so I'll speak a little more about our business model with a further question, but to say that our business model is slightly different. We don't tend to be raising revenue directly from software downloads or software sales because we're mostly a membership-driven organization. So that perception doesn't quite affect us in the same way because people, we're generating our revenue from other sources. So the fact that people expect it to be freeware or open source, it kind of doesn't matter. People get what they expect is they can download the software for free. So it doesn't tend to affect the way I work quite as much, but probably because of the difference in our business model. We're not looking to try to raise revenue from software sales.
But I'm not speaking about software sales. It's in general that it might be that you say, we offer open source software, but you want to receive money in some other way. What's the feedback that you get?
Yeah, well, as I say, because our revenue, we've never really tried to raise revenue directly from, our revenue is really mainly derived from membership fees and project funding. So yeah, we haven't really had to bite that bullet. We just put our software up online. You can download it for free. So we don't actually really have that much interaction with the people who download the software unless they start to log bugs, etc. And again, we're kind of committed to our articles of association. Our purpose is to maintain that software for free in the long term. So that's our raison d'etre as an organisation, which means that people we're not really dealing with people where we're actually telling them we're going to charge you for this, for a specific thing. That's not something we generally do. So yeah, from my own point of view, it doesn't really affect or from the OPF's point of view, it doesn't really affect what we do. As a developer, it's slightly different because more and more people seem to think that developers almost work for free, as you say, that in the end you need to be paid for, the key, the way I say it is, you're paid for doing it once, you produce it, and then the means of distribution is free. And that's really what open source to some degree leverages. But you still need to be paid once, but we tend to be paid from either indirectly through membership fees or by direct project funding, which means we're not really trying to generate revenue through downloads or even bespoke work generally.
But that's exactly the thing. As you say, it's like people know it from like, I buy software, I pay it. Then as Jérôme said, but I'm using your software, so I paid for it, so I have the right to do bug reports. And like, in this case, you didn't. And you just said you have a completely different business model.
Yeah.
And what are the institutions that are your paying members? Like kind of like, what is in it for them? Why are they paying?
So maybe a little bit of history would help, because we were set up off the back of the Planets project, a large EU project, to really sustain the results of research projects was one of the original missions of the Open Preservation Foundation. So there was a group of founding members there who between mostly large national archives and libraries, and we have a variety of members now. And that is the reason we were set up. So we will take projects on from member interests, and there is a slightly different idea because we've been commissioned to produce the software, and we've agreed to sustain it as part of the. Our agreement with Performer is we will sustain the project beyond the lifetime of Performer. Another example might be something like Jove, where we took Jove on because it was abandoned by initially it was developed by Harvard, passed over to Gary McGath, who maintained it as an individual for 3 years after that. But when he decided he could no longer take the work up, there was enough of our members. This is what you get. One of the things you get for the membership is our members turn around and say, well, somebody has to maintain this software going forward. It's important to us. So that's one of the things you get for the membership money is if there's 2 or 3 members who are interested, we will then take the software on. So we maintain Jove on that basis because our paying members care about the software, and that's why we maintain it. But again, we don't do bespoke development for money. We will, member interest would drive the way we develop the software generally.
Yeah. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
May I ask now to Klaus?
About software being seen as freeware, that's totally true. It's even more true, I would say, from a user side. And that's a big problem. Because when we buy software, that's the essence of every achievement of a software. So we buy software, but we need prices to compare. We cannot make a procurement without anything to procure. So it's hard to get the money to assign into a budget, saying next year we would need this software. Well, yeah, but what does it cost? Well, I don't really know. It's could be a little bit.
That's an interesting aspect, that there's not even a number for the procurement. Yeah, continue.
The procurement is the base of getting software, getting new software into the company. So what I try to do is rather try it myself first. So that's the software, and sneak it into use, and getting the let's say the need for the software, and then it's easier to maybe get money afterwards to improve the software.
Okay. Interesting approach, like positively interesting. Julia?
I think I agree with a lot of what you were just saying. And so the Library of Congress just became members of BitCurator, which is a big US-based, I guess, digital forensics sort of suite of tools that's built on open source digital forensics tools that exist already. But trying to have this conversation with administrators and managers in terms of becoming a member was very confusing because just understanding what sort of accounting code it came under and what was the value of it describe when you know, and we can and we do use it. I do use it without explicit discussions. I just sort of use it on my own sort of laptops and computers and so forth, and I've integrated it. But the idea of like, why should we become a member? How do we even get this through accounting is a difficult sort of question. And then the sort of opacity around the different business models, I think, is also confusing because what we have right here is, you know, different funding routes, the ongoing sort of external grant funders and consortiums, and then a different model where we have, you know, sponsorship or like purchasing specialized extra features or, you know, bug reporting or whatever, or like help desk issues. So trying to explain this is like a whole other issue. So I think sometimes that can lead, I'm speculating, I mean, Jove, we integrate it in our repository and that's very common, right? But that has become a standard in a sense, standard lowercase, and that it's just so widely used that everybody has done that. But if with these open source tools, there's like so much confusion about integration with something like MediaConch where I'm actually using it and relying on it, I wonder about it, you know, how long will it take for that to be integrated? How long will that conversation need to sort of happen because it's not understood? I think it'll be easier than maybe it was commercial, but I still think there's just confusion, right? I mean, even
It
here,
is
there's some
commercial.
confusion.
You just said it would be easier if it would be commercial. It is.
Well, it is easier, but it's
No,
still...
it is commercial.
It's still,
That was my point.
It is, okay, you're right, it is. It is commercial. But I mean, if it was clearer, I think, because a lot of times the confusion is the business models, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. I think that people are really confused when they're like, there is no price tag on it. How do I deal with it? I also know it from free content licenses on radio stations. They're like, we don't touch this because we don't know how to deal with it. It's a bit of a weird world. Klaus?
Just wanted to add that this confusion, as you say, adds a lot of stress for me as a user within the organization because I want to pay for it, but I want to use the software, but I can't pay for it because the organization have problem paying for it. So my decision is using, not using, being, sometimes it feels like I'm stealing this software.
No.
So, because I want to give the money, but how?
Okay, we'll just put a price tag on it.
Yeah, just say from my own point of view, one thing that working as an open source developer has been more sensitive to is the revenue streams of other open source tools that I use. So I'm more likely to donate probably to, if I use something more than for a few weeks, I'm more likely to look for some kind of donation route so I can return something to the developer. And that's something that probably does come from basically working in a situation where you're not necessarily paid for what you're doing. I am paid for what I'm doing, but yeah, you're not directly paid through software sales. It maybe makes you a little more sensitive to how you can help other organizations that work along a similar model. Yeah.
Yeah, similar to that, I often got some answer from a buyer is we are ready to pay X% of the initial price for the support. And we sell support, and we actually, as it is open source, and we have sometimes a small fee for the download, or it is for free. So X% of zero stays zero, and they cannot accept to pay a support more than X% than the initial price. It is formatted like that, and X% of zero stays zero, and we need to change the model they have in order to prove that the support is not a percentage of the initial price. And sometimes we have a wall saying, okay, it is zero, so support is zero. It is X%
But couldn't you
of
just
zero.
like
Why?
add a price tag to the initial price? Like, okay, you want to have the software, here's an initial price.
And if we say, okay, and we sell the software at this price, they said, but it is free, so why should I pay? And it is a vicious circle.
Okay, but it's only related to the initial price of the software itself. If you charge an initial fee for not a license, would that work?
Sometimes it happens that I sell a license, actually, and for the same thing that the free version, because it fits in the business model they have. And the issue is that the business model is fixed, and it is support is only a percentage of initial
I
price.
know, especially in
and we
institutions,
need
you have a
to
very rigid.
demonstrate that it is not the only business model possible. And we talk about commercial, not commercial. We are commercial, and open source does not mean not commercial. Zero does not mean not commercial. It is only a different business model. And yes, it is sometimes frustrating to hear that we are compared to commercial software, because we are part of the commercial part. We sell something,
Yes.
so only differently.
I have this. Who of you in the audience has ever paid for open source and or services? Who has never? Okay, now there's something wrong because there were like just a few hands up before. Okay, so I guess like it was like at least 1/3 kind of raised the hand, so the others didn't. I lost my point. I love it when that happens. Who of you would consider paying for using open source? That's good. And does it have to be easy? Like as we've heard, obviously it seems a bit complicated, even if people want to. So who think it should be easier or clearer for them to be able to pay? Well, so I think there's some stuff, we will never finish this because this is like going on for years now, and as we have to figure things out on the go. I mean, I myself, I'm also a company offering open source as service and like development and things. So it's the same thing. And I find it really difficult when institutions tell me, we need this, but we're not allowed to pay you for it. And this is quite absurd. Coming to the next point, which is now not no, I'm splitting it. Okay. Sometimes I've heard, more in the past than in the present, it's like, open source is unprofessional. It's the freebie stuff that the people use that have no money. It's unprofessional and it's of less quality. Let's start on the user side there. What is your opinion and perception of this?
I can imagine that being truer in the past, but I think within our community, we're so reliant on open source tools that have driven our ability to do our work that whatever perceptions that were in sort of that vein are gone by the actual users. I don't know about maybe management having some of that, but I do wonder at what you were saying earlier, if you already, though, have the perception that the price point is zero, that sets this sort of anchor for like what additional costs are. So it's just confusion about how to value. What is the value if it's going to be monetized? I mean, I honestly have no idea. Like I know from joining BitCurator what they're charging for some sort of membership fee, right? And then they have different tiers for, and again, different model for voting rights for sort of pointing the direction of growth. But, you know, I can imagine like small donations just for use, which I've done with like personally with using stuff, but like huge range. So understanding what that means, it's hard from my end as well. If I'm trying to advocate within the organization in terms of the value, and if value means money.
It's very often necessary, I've seen this in certain projects, like to give people a figure. Yeah. Otherwise, they're like, how much is something that I can't touch, like, how do you judge or the value of software or immaterial goods in general? And it's very good if the people who provide it give it a figure in comparison to something else that either has a figure or if there's nothing in comparison. Like, what is the benefit for the people using it? Because do they save time? Do they save resources? What is their benefit? And then you can put this into numbers. And I found this to be a really good starting point. Because otherwise, as you say, what? Is 10 euros okay? Yeah. Should it be 10,000? I've been working as a developer for proprietary preservation software and audio digitalization for broadcast archives. And I know some figures. And what I sometimes do is like, okay, let's just take the proprietary system and because you're my friend, you know, and it's open source, we make a little bit less. What the deal? Actually, that works pretty good.
Yeah, having a worksheet like that would be really useful, I think. Just sort of comparisons, models.
Putting it on my to-do list. Klaus?
Saying that it's unprofessional and of lower quality, well, it's not true. I have to say it's not true, but there are perceptions that is true in sometimes. I think it's based on people's memory, because see, it's like a hotel review. If you get 1,000 good reviews and you get one bad saying there's a bug in my room, you will choose another hotel if you see that one, because it's you remember those bad things. So if there's one unprofessional software, it will pull everything down. So there have to be a certain level of professionalism for the developers to maintain that.
A very, very good point. I have a long year background in Linux community, and I hang around with a lot of developers. Like this is like the open source land out there. And I would say Linux has a very bad image in terms of, oh yeah, it's hard to use and only the command line and hackers. Who of you uses Linux? Cool. Awesome. Okay, who of you uses Mac? Who of you knows that they share a tremendous amount of code? Awesome. Okay, usually I didn't expect that many hands. So I like to present this because it's like the perception of macOS stuff and the perception of free software on Linux operating systems is like on the other sides of the scale. This is, yeah, nothing works and stuff like that, and it's unprofessional, and that's that thing. So it's all about perception, as you say. It's a human thing.
And it's also, there is a lot of backtalk from professional developers. Not that you're not professional, but for working for closed proprietary software companies, saying that, well, it's not modern. You need to get modernized. We are using the latest, and you get what you pay for.
Sorry, I almost forgot that yesterday. It was like you get what you pay for. In German, we have was nichts kostet ist nichts wert. So what doesn't cost anything can be worth nothing. Now, this principle, I can not stress it enough that it applies to physical objects and other stuff, and sometimes also to software, but actually not necessarily, because software is not linked to physics. It's like, if I make a good table, I have to use good wood and stuff like this. With software, I have to put time and expertise in it. But once it's done, I can multiply it, and we all know it because people are afraid of people copying a bit too much on the internet. So that thing it doesn't apply to software. You get really good and really bad software for really little and really high prices, and on the different licenses. I would say that quality is price and license independent. It really depends who did it, for what, and how many people are behind it. Disagree? Or anything to add? Yeah, sorry.
It's true, and also the quality is in the perception of it. So it's
yes.
It's the truth is only there what everybody thinks about it. The truth can be something totally different.
We've had it in companies that I used to work for. It was the tap water thingy was dripping, and the joke was, oh yeah, that's because we have the Linux service. Because people don't know how things interact with each other, and they blame the thing that the new kid on the playground or
they joke about things they don't understand.
Yes, so they burn witches, and they still do it in software.
A remark about that, how the perception, it is a good thing to discuss about. It's like when someone pays for a thing, it must be good. So it is like rejecting that the quality is not always there, but someone paid for it, so it is not possible to be bad. And when it is free, it is free, so it
Because
may
what's
be
the value?
bad. So okay, and the perception is linked to the price. And,
Absolutely.
we need to break this link between price and quality. And yeah, it is difficult, and I don't know how to break this.
I would have an idea. You do open source and you publish it not on your web page, but on the web page you have like, this is media info, can do this and that for you, and it costs 5,000 euros per license, and then you leak it on torrent. Because seriously, like when I ask people, let's take one popular image editing application. I will not name a name here. You probably know which one I mean because there's only one widely used. And most people I ask have never paid a cent for it. They're all using illegal copies. But they value it by the price they didn't pay, that like, oh, you know what, dude? I so got that software, like shitload of money, sorry, and I didn't pay it. And so they give it the value that someone else, like, it's not about what they pay, it's about the perceived value. So actually I want to try this once, like put an open source program there, give it a like really, really big price that it's actually worth, and then leak it on torrent, and people go like, I got it now, and you don't. Carl?
I mean, yeah, so I get it quite a lot from people. I've come from a background where I worked for some commercial software companies. So a lot of my friends are still professional developers. They don't work in open source, and they'll still say, well, it's of lower quality. It's one of my first arguments I'll use to refute that is the internet is reliable. It runs 24/7, 365 days a year, and it's mostly built on open source software. And the incident with the Heartbleed bug last year showed how much the internet relies on open source software. And, as I say, it turned out that this critical piece of software was basically maintained by one guy in Germany in his spare time. But that no one suggested dropping it. It hasn't been replaced still. They fixed the bug and they move on with the software. And again, I had a conversation with a friend recently who was looking to buy quite an expensive music streamer. And I use an open source application on a small device, a small embedded device. And he was, well, I'm going to pay, I think it was about £800 for the streamer, and I'm going to pay that because of the software. And it was only when I proved to him it was actually using the same piece of open source software as I was using on the Raspberry Pi that he changed his mind. And again, it was that perception of the fact that he was paying £800 for software that was actually just a wrapped version of an open source. And at that stage, he changed his mind. But yeah, as I say, the reliability, and another good example might be the Blu-ray encryption service and how encryption tends to be better when it's open and there's lots of eyes on it, so people can test software. So the best encryption algorithms tend to be open source. Sony developed Blu-ray encryption software in secret, and it was cracked within 24 hours of being released.
Yeah, freedom flag.
Yeah, as I say, so because not enough eyes had been on it. It was really,
Thank you very much. It's Julia, you wanted to say something?
So the software procurement process, like everything in my organization, which is a giant bureaucracy, is itself a whole mess. So one of the reasons I've been able to integrate new tools readily is because I don't have to go through that process. But I will say that if there was costing, it's not so much the evaluation of zero cost by administrators meaning zero quality. It's more that I paid a lot for this. How are we going to integrate this? Let's make this work. What's going on with that? Have you trained other staff to use it? Who's using it? How are we getting our repository to integrate it? So it's more that sense of it. It's more like, okay, like we need to keep on top of this because we're the government and we're checking off our dollars, making sure they count, sort of thing.
That's a very valid, good point. It's like they said, oh, now we've paid so much for this, we have to do something with it. And with free software, open source, sometimes they just throw it away because they're like, we didn't pay for it, so we don't bother if we keep it or not. One thing before you, to the thing that you said about like the internet is actually based, it would not function without open source. I claim it's actually the technology of the world of the 21st century. It's the foundation is open source. So I've written down in my little notebook here. It's actually open source nowadays, it's a bit like nature. You know, a lot of people, like, they grow crops, they do stuff, they make money with it, and the actual work and the actual foundation is the nature that we're in. It's the physics, it's the environment. And people kind of take it for granted. It's like, yeah, of course there's water, dude, duh. And I would like to highlight this because a lot of people think that open source is like the alternative that came later. Actually, it's how it all started. And then people were like, hey, dude, we can sell water. We just have to make sure that people don't have access to water and don't figure out that they could actually get it free. And so this is about what you said. It's the foundation of stuff. Claude?
Yeah, there was one other thing I was going to say, which is something that's occurred to me more in the last couple of years is one advantage you have developing open source software is you can be open about the way you test and quality assure your software in a way that closed source companies can't be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, trying to make visible the lens you go to test and QA your software is something you can do as an open source organization. It's probably a way of trying to mitigate this lack of quality, lack of testing route, and that's something we're working fairly hard on as an organization. I mean, particularly with Jove, which we took over a couple of years ago, and rather than develop new features, actually ensuring that that's properly tested and people can see that it clearly does what it's supposed to do and it works properly is one of the advantages we have over closed source software. Yeah.
Klaus, you wanted to say?
I will take it further on.
You have a secret hidden agenda.
No. Okay, I thought it would fit a little bit better, but you said about the value of the software. It's fictitious somehow. But a few years ago, I came across an open source game on the internet, and it was the way of you get the game, but you pay what you like. You pay what you think it's worth. And it was not only that, it was in what you pay will give a certain percentage to charity. So there you added value, because not only I get the product, I get something that maybe makes me feel good to have contributed. So that's maybe fits more into, well, it's a business model, could be. And also what they did there is that they showed a list of what others have paid.
That's
Because
the same thing.
it
Giving
relates.
a figure to start with.
It relates to what you said, that, look, I downloaded this and I didn't pay this much money. It's a fictitious, you didn't earn anything or make any money on it, but you see, you didn't lose money on it. So there you give it a value because you see what other paid, and it became a contest.
That's a very good point. It's like you have to give people something.
It is working with individuals, but does it work for corporation? I have doubts that it works for corporation.
Yeah. We're getting closer to the end, although we started a bit late because people were not coming back from coffee. Last question, not in this book. What are the benefits of open source software, especially in the fields of preservation? I'm not saying long-term, because we figured we want to have short-term preservation, like short-term effects and long-term preservation. Where do we want to start? Who wants to? Does it make a difference? Does it matter? Doesn't it matter? It's.
I mean, I am completely reliant on all this stuff. I couldn't do my job. I would just sit at my desk and be like, this is pointless.
Yeah, but if it would be proprietary, where would be the difference whether it would be proprietary or open for you?
Well, first of all, the fact that costing is a side point, but as I said before, like that adds a lot of impediments where I am right now. And we also have very strict lists of approved security run software. So I recently got pinged by our IT security because I had a Slack browser plugin accidentally, and they came in and left a sticky and told me like my privileges would be revoked and so forth. So being able to sidestep that is sort of crucial for me to implement things really quickly and to sort of.
Sidestep in terms of like you sneak behind the actual
I
administration?
have
or
something
the-
not connected to the, not behind the firewall that I can do a lot of work on, for example, and install things sort of locally, like as of my own to go through to avoid security, but which is totally approved and okay. I've totally lost track of the question though.
Okay, the question was whether it's proprietary closed source or open source.
Right.
Where's the difference? Where would be benefits, or where would be benefits of this for you?
Well, we can possibly, so I'm hoping for integration for some of these tools, because I guess we have Jove integrated in our repository, but we don't have a lot of support for other complex, we don't have support in our repository for any AV sort of identification, validation. I mean, many institutions don't, but being able to build off of that and integrate it through the API, or like create, more robust workflows down the line, I think is a possibility with this, much more so. No?
I'm not testing you. I'm just like
The eyebrow went up. I don't know.
Well, the benefits of each one of them, there are benefits with proprietary too. In my opinion, it's if you have a product, if you're a customer or a developer with a product with low community, small community, then it's a way of funding in proprietary that may increase the development of it.
But you know that this is not license specific. If you
Yeah.
especially in the niche market, I figured that proprietary vendors often go like, where's the money, where's the money, where's the money, as we've heard yesterday. And they're like, oh, there's the market. Now the archive is very often a niche market. And when I buy an analog digital converter for video, they're not built for me as an archive. They can hardly have any more transfer. So in that case, I would actually say it's the other way around, because if I then take the money and put it into an open source thing that has, for example, a user base in some other area, and I can add
That's
the
well,
stuff
I mean,
and modify
if they
it.
don't have the user base, so it's it could be that you get investors that do things for you instead. But I'm more into the open source anyway, so it's.
But why?
But why? Yeah, it's transparency, and the code will last longer.
That's a
It
good
will
one.
live longer because I'm not dependent on a company that can say, I quit tomorrow because.
Yeah, but we've heard that the open source community, which I don't know who that is, sometimes drops open source projects too.
Yeah, they might do that, but the code is still there
Thank you.
for someone else to pick up.
Okay, that was a test question. You
Yeah.
got an A.
So it's the benefits. It's longer lifetime of code, I would say. I don't know what
Yeah.
that it will.
From your
Work.
side?
It was just a riff off of what you said, which was that, yes, we are a niche market. We don't have a lot of choices anyway. And at least with this, we can have things that are clearly tested to operate with what we need to do. Some of the examples that I had with interoperability problems yesterday in my presentation, I mean, these people or developers and, like Adobe Photoshop, they're not really caring about the fact that they're truncating their files, or they were probably not aware about it. Or when they're creating and publicizing standards, like the QuickTime example, I don't see, they don't have the needs that we do. They're not anticipating us and what we need out of this, which is like clear documentation and standards and so forth. We're just like this weird niche, just elaborating off what you said.
From my point of view, the major advantage for users is that the users don't depend on us. If we don't do the good job, if we don't meet the roadmap they want, so we say, oh, we don't want to develop that because it is not good for our goal. User can say, okay, I do it, or I pay someone else for that. and we compete every day. And from my point of view, it is a good thing for the end user. There is open competition every day. So we don't do a good job. Okay, you fork, you switch from for another developer, and he can does the job. The advantage of open source is that you are not linked to one developer, and this developer says, "Oh, I am not interested for this feature, so I will not do it." And you can do nothing because the software is completely closed, and you cannot just adapt or ask someone to adapt to your needs. And you need to beg to the main developer, the single developer. And with open source, I think that it is very important that the users are not linked to a single company.
That's a very, very good point.
One point I would make is that, open source software makes it, we talk about preserving the content in the long term, it actually makes it far more practical to preserve the software stack that content relies on in the long term. I mean, one of the nice things about Vera PDF, or in fact all the open source Performer components, is that you can be sure that a submitting organization can freely use the software. So if you're a small organization or have hundreds of submitters, you don't have to worry about license fees for starters. So every submitter could, in theory, use that software for free to quality check the item before they even send it to you. And you can be sure that in the long term, you can continue to recreate that test, and even in 10 years' time, as long as you have the expertise to build the software. And that's why really I think for organizations getting a little more involved, trying to invest a little in their own stuff so that they at least know how to build. They don't just download the thing, they have an idea of how to build and test the software themselves would be a handy step to allowing them this long-term preservation of the actual software stack that they rely on. And there was another point I was going to make, and it might come to me in a second. I'll hand over to you for a second, Peter, and I'll interrupt you if I remember.
That's perfectly what you said. I would like to add to this. My personal experience is when I say people like, hey, and you have the choice to build the software and you can archive the source code. They're like, dude, seriously not. I can archive the source code, whatever that is, however I do that. I'm like, just print it out, it's text, okay? But then like, and now what? And so this is why I want to add, I used to live in an apartment in Vienna that was built around end of 1800 something, beginning of 1900 something. So it's quite an old building. I'm pretty sure that the original vendors are not around anymore. And there was actually a problem in the bathroom. I wanted to change the tiles, and I bring this example because I didn't do it myself. I couldn't do it myself, but I could ask someone to do it. And now this building was over 100 years old. And it was never built for electricity. It was built for different purposes. They didn't have toilets for each apartment. So my point I'm getting at is that a lot of people miss out with proprietary software. If you had the real world without the use, study, share, and improve freedoms, you'd have to tear down buildings and rebuild them just because you want to add a bathroom or electricity. And you don't have to do it yourself. So as you say, it would be great if people knew more about this. I hope this will happen. But then they can choose their builder, and they can go like, I want to have you do that, or you do that, or I can do it myself if I want to.
I mean, one service that I quite like is, everyone's heard of GitHub. There's a service that lives alongside it called Travis, which is open source. Sorry, not open source, but it's it's web-based continuous integration. So it basically allows you to show how you build your software and prove that the software continues to build, which is it's one thing to have the source, it's another thing to know how to actually turn that into an executable, which is what you require to save that, to preserve that software in the long term. But those open services do allow you to actually prove again that you test and build your software, and you can, as a user, you can look to see how that software is built and tested. And the other point I was going to make is I find myself in a situation with an open source software stack that I use at the moment where it will horrify some Linux users. I like Unity, which is Canonical's. It's the desktop environment. It's a bit like the Windows environment, but it's the window manager I use for Linux, and I've used it for 6-7 years, and I'm heavily invested in the keyboard shortcuts, and they've just announced they're no longer supporting it. It's going to be pulled from the next version. But I'm already been able to look at the source code stack, and I can see there's a breakaway project that will at least hopefully continue to support the desktop I use and maybe even allow me a little more choice in the underlying version of Linux I use. I don't know, but it feels like there's at least opportunities rather than it's just Canonical announced there's no more support and I'm about to use the desktop that's, it'll take me several months in training myself on another desktop to reach the same level of productivity. So I'm hoping that I can sidestep that issue. We'll see. But yeah, that's one that I'm facing at the moment, which as I say, I'm hoping the fact that it's open source will allow me to sidestep the issue.
That's a very good closing thing. It's not a silver bullet, but at least it doesn't add additional artificial obstacles to doing stuff. Like if you really depend on those keyboard shortcuts, you could make it happen. It's just a question of how much is it worth to you and maybe others. Whereas if it was closed source and proprietary, you're like, there's nothing I can do. This one says 35. Mine says 30. I believe in mine. So we're making a point landing at 12:30. Every one of you can add a last statement. Then I don't know if we have time for Q&A. Yeah? Should we involve them? Any questions or comments from the audience? You, the open source community of these projects that you use. Anything? Bert? I can hardly see any one of you.
So in Performa, it was not just only about open source software, but also about using copyleft, the idea of copyleft. Also, which means that it's not just about developing software you're free to use, to change, to further develop, to hack, whatever you want to do with it, but that you also use a license which forces everyone that changes or develops the software to publish it under the same license, so the project continues to be open in the future. And I want to ask to the developer specifically. So also that choice was also from the idea that would make the open source project more sustainable, because you force everyone doing anything with the software to contribute and to make that available again. So I want to ask to the developers what was their experience in the last 5 years. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, the copyleft was not part of your policy or vision. What was your experience in the development, and do you feel that it makes your project more sustainable?
The open source community is not a single entity, and there is a big discussions between copyleft and copy-free. So copy-free is the opposite of copyleft, and everyone is free to close the source code and reuse everywhere he wants. MediaArea is a copy-free company, so we have in mind more liberty than what Performa wanted. There was a discussion 2 years ago about that. There is pros and cons with the two ideas, and from our point of view, we prefer to give the liberty to the user to do everything he wants, and we want to convince him that open source is a good way. And from our point of view too, it is not the whole open source community point of view, I just said that, is that copyleft, the idea is good, but there is too many incompatibilities with licenses. For example, we have GPL v2 only software and GPL v3 only software. Both are copyleft, but we cannot mix them together because the license versions are incompatible. And it is a pity to lose some merge only due to the incompatibility of licenses. So from our point of view, we prefer, when we can, to let the user decide when he wants to continue with open source.
Yeah, my take would be fairly similar. Politically, I like the copyleft licenses. Practically, it tends to be the license incompatibility issue that forces you to sometimes have to go for a more relaxed license because there's code you want to use that's incompatible with the strong copyleft license. So yeah, very much echo the same thing. It's the practicalities of the libraries, underlying libraries you're going to use that usually makes your mind up for you.
I think this is a very tricky thing because morally, I think it's that the copyleft is a good and necessary thing. And then when I say necessary, I'd say I'd rather have a world where it's not necessary. But as I see that a lot of vendors go and say, hey, cool, now you developers make this stuff, I take it, I don't give you anything. No code, no money, no nothing. I take your stuff, I wrap it up and I sell it and put an Apple on it, for example, and put your name somewhere in a text file that nobody reads. I find this unfair. And then if I use a copyleft license, they go like, now I will not touch your code because I'm not sure if I have to open stuff up now. So anyway, you bend and twist it, it has pros and cons, but the question is for whom? And that's why there are different licenses. And maybe in the future we'll be beyond this. But I watch a lot of science fiction, utopia things. I still like that. Any more questions, comments? No? Should we let them go? Anything from your side? Well done. In order to stay on schedule, thank you very much. See you around and enjoy the rest of the conference.